Okay, very good morning to one and all. So this is Sheikh.John Sydulu, Assistant Professor of Department of CSE, Chalapati Institute of Engineering and Technology, Autonomous. So very good morning to one and all. So in the today's section, we are going to discussing about the Dockers. Okay, so in this session, we are going to discussing about the definition of a Docker and what are the advantages of the Docker and why do we use the Docker and what is the architecture of the Docker and what are the three main components that are involved within the architecture of the Docker. So let's see one by one. So first of all, we will go with what is a Docker. That is nothing but the definition of a Docker. So a Docker is nothing but it is a software development platform for virtualization with multiple operating systems running on the same host. So it helps to separate infrastructure and application in order to deliver software quickly. So here, so this Docker is nothing but it is a software development platform for the virtualization. So it is going to provide some kind of virtualization here. So with the multiple operating systems, they are going to be run on the same host. Okay, so it is going to provide some kind of illusion to the user that so the multiple operating systems are going to be running on the same host. Okay, so it helps to separate the infrastructure as well as the applications in order to deliver the software quickly. Okay, so it means so within the single system, if we have the multiple operating systems, so we have to provide the accession of those system related resources to the each and every operating system that is running on the same host. Okay, so it helps to separate the infrastructure and applications in order to deliver the software quickly. So with the Docker, you can manage your infrastructure in the same ways you manage within your applications. Okay, so now see why we will go for Dockers instead of your normal atmosphere or the normal environment of your applications. Okay, so here the main thing is that so with the help of this Docker, we are going to provide the virtualization that so the multiple operating systems can be running on the same host here. Okay, so unlike the hypervisors, okay, so these Dockers are separate from your hypervisors. Okay, why I am going to stressing more upon this is so Dockers are very different from your hypervisors. Okay, why? Because so within the hypervisors, okay, within the hypervisors, so we have to maintain the resources or we have to allocate the resources to the one operating system. But when it comes to the Docker containerization, so within the same host we are having the multiple number of operating systems and those operating systems can be run very quickly upon your particular host. Okay, so in order to provide this virtualization, okay, in order to provide this virtualization, so we will make use of different kinds of virtual machines. Okay, so the virtual machine in the sense, so within the same machine we are going to import more than one operating systems here. So let's see how we are going to provide the virtualization with the help of the VMs, that is nothing but virtual machines within your Docker, which is too far from the or which is too separate from the your hypervisor. So unlike hypervisors, so which are used for creating the virtual machines, that is the virtualization in Docker is performed on system level. They are also called as the Docker containers. Okay, so here the Docker container will plays the vital role here. So the Docker containers are nothing but these containers are having the structural units of the Docker. So that is nothing but so which is used to hold the entire package that is needed to run the application within your host. Okay, so the main advantage of these containers is that so it requires very less number of resources. Okay, so with the help of very less number of resources also it is going to perform some kind of computations here. Okay, or in other words, so we can say that the image, so within the Docker container we are having the different kinds of Docker images. They are nothing but the read only binary templates. Okay, so the Docker images are nothing but they are the read only binary templates. Okay, so these Docker images are used as a template within your Docker containers and the container is a copy of that particular Docker image, that is nothing but the Docker template here. Okay, so now coming to the advantages, so this Docker is a open platform for developing, shipping and running the different kinds of applications here. Okay, for developing, shipping and running the different kinds of applications, so this Docker is very helpful. And one more thing is, so this Docker is a very open platform. It means so it will be available uh, throughout the thing. Okay, so now coming to this, so here, so what they are uh, saying about the first advantage is it is a open platform for developing, shipping and running the applications. Okay, so the developing in the sense, so here we are going to building the Docker application. Okay, so the development environment, so within this development environment we have to build that container, and whatever the container we have to build, that is going to be shipped. So ship in the sense, so here we have to create and store some images. They are nothing but the Docker images, they are nothing but the Docker templates here. Okay, so the next one is running applications. So running applications in the sense, so whatever the thing that is going to be created, okay, that is nothing but whatever the Docker images or the Docker templates that we have created, so those are going to be deployed or those are going to be managed and those are going to be scaled in order to do some kind of IT operations. Okay, so from the developer's perspective, so we are going to develop a Docker and we are going to ship that Docker. That is nothing but, so we have to create and we have to store some images here. So when it comes to the IT operations, okay, so IT operations point of view, so whatever the Docker images that we have developed here, so that is going to be deployed and they are going to be deployed and managed and scaled with the help of Docker running. Okay, so the second advantage is that you can significantly reduce the delay between writing the code and running it in production. Okay, so the second advantage is that, so we have to reduce the delay, the time. Okay, so whenever we are talking about a operating system or whenever you are talking about a Docker, so reducing the time, that is nothing but the time complexity is also plays a vital role here. So here, so coming to the another one advantage of this Dockers, so you can significantly reduce the delay between writing code and running it in your production here. Okay, so next let's see, so why we are going for the Dockers. That is nothing but why do we need the Dockers? Okay, why do we need this Dockers? Okay, so before we are going to discussing about this Docker architecture, let us explain, so why do we use this Dockers. So you know very well about that. So the Docker is nothing but it is computer software for the used for the virtualization. So in order to have the multiple operating systems, they can be running on the same host. Okay, multiple operating system they can be running on the same host. So one more thing is, so generally this Docker is nothing but, so it can follows the client and the server type of application. So which means we have the different kinds of clients and those clients are going to be relay or dependent upon your server. So that is why you can call this Docker is follows the client server architecture. Okay, so the next one is, so the Docker images are the source code for our containers. Okay, so the Docker images. So the Docker images are having their own templates. So the mixture of those Docker images are called the Docker template there. Okay, so that Docker images are the source code for our containers and we can use them to build and we can use them to run. Okay, so next one is, so the Docker. So Docker file have the two different kind of or two different types of registries. They are nothing but the public registries and private registries. Okay, so in order to have the multiple operating systems, they can be running on the same host. That is nothing but in order to provide the virtualization. So now we will go with a computer software, that is nothing but the Docker here. So coming to the Docker architecture, so actually, so the Docker architecture will follows the client server architecture. Okay, so it can includes the three main components. They are nothing but the Docker client, Docker host and Docker registry. Okay, so within the Docker client, so we are having the Docker build, Docker pull and Docker run here. Okay, so and one more thing is, so the Docker client always uses the commands and the REST application programming interfaces to communicate with the Docker daemon. So here the Docker daemon is nothing but the Docker host here. So the Docker daemon is nothing but the Docker server here. So within your Docker host, within the second main component of your Docker architecture, we are having the Docker host. So within that Docker host component, we are having the Docker daemon, so which is nothing but the Docker server. Okay, so this Docker server can enable all the Docker clients are going to be communicate with your Docker server by using some kind of commands and the application programming interfaces. Okay, so when a client runs on any Docker, so the command on the Docker client terminal and the Docker terminal sends these Docker commands to the Docker daemon, and that Docker daemon receives these commands from the Docker's client in the form of the command and REST API's request. Okay, so here, so the Docker client uses the command line interface. Okay, CLI, that is nothing but the command line interface. So the Docker client always uses the command line interface to run the following commands. They are nothing but the Docker build, Docker pull, Docker run. So these kind of commands are going to be run with the help of your Docker client. So in order to run these kind of commands, this Docker client can use the command line interfaces. Okay, so the point is very clear. That is, so within the first one, within the Docker client, we are having the Docker commands. So those Docker commands are going to be run with the help of some commands on the REST APIs. Those are used to communicate with the Docker daemon. So let's see this one. That is, so coming to this here, the main component, that is the first and foremost main component of your Docker architecture is nothing but the Docker client. So where the Docker client uses the commands on the REST APIs to communicate with the Docker daemon, that is the server. When a client runs any Docker command on the Docker client terminal, the client terminal sends these Docker commands to the Docker daemon, and Docker daemon receives these commands from the Docker client in the form, that is command and REST APIs request. Okay, so here the Docker client uses the command line interface in order to run the following commands. They are nothing but the Docker build, Docker pull and Docker run. Okay, which are going to be shown within your Docker architecture first component. Okay, so coming to the second component, that is nothing but the Docker host. Okay, so second major component is nothing but the Docker host. So what is the main functionality of this Docker host? So the main functionality of the Docker host is that, so it is used to provide an environment to execute and run the applications. Okay, so mainly this Docker host is used to provide an environment to execute and run the applications. Okay, so in order to execute and in order to run the applications with the help of some environment within your Docker host, so it should contains Docker daemons. They are nothing but the Docker server. So Docker daemon is nothing but the Docker server here. So that is going to provide several kind of responses to the different Docker clients. Okay, so it contains the Docker daemon, that is nothing but the Docker server, and the Docker images which are having some kind of Docker templates, and then containers and networks and this storage here. Okay, so the major functionality of the second main component of your Docker architecture is nothing but the Docker host, where we are having the Docker daemon, which is nothing but the Docker server. Okay, so it is going to provide some kind of execution and running of your Docker host. Okay, with the help of the Docker daemons, Docker images, Docker containers, networks, and the storage here. So that is the second major component. Next, coming to the third major component, that is nothing but the Docker registry. Okay, Docker registry. So coming to this Docker registry, so the main functionality of this Docker registry is nothing but it is going to be manages and stores the different Docker images that can be coming from your Docker host. Okay, so whatever the Docker images that are going to be maintained within your Docker host, so they are going to be managed and they are going to be stored with the help of the Docker images. Okay, so now coming to the registries here, so within the Docker registry, we are having the two different types of registries in the Docker. So they are nothing but the public registry and the private registry. So the public registry is also called as the Docker Hub, okay, Docker Hub, and the private registry. So this private registry is always used for the enterprise thing, okay, so it is used to share the images within the enterprise. So the public registry is also called as the Docker Hub, and the private registry is only used for the enterprise purposes. It means, so it is going to it is used to share the images within the enterprise. Okay,